Hey there, we want to welcome you to this week's CG edition at Community Life Church. And so I am joined here by the mysterious, I don't know why you're mysterious, Kyle. I just thought it'd be good to call you mysterious.
Trying to come up with a good adjective.
That's your new wrestling name.
My wrestling
The mysterious Kyle Kelley. And Kyle
Wow.
is our Rockwall campus pastor and joined us on staff here a little over a year ago. Is that right, Kyle?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
In a year.
About a year ago, and so Kyle's going to be discussing, Kyle, we want to talk about some of this week's message,
Right.
and as we ended this series. So we ended this series called 1 Minute After You Die. I think that's the name of it. Is that the name of it? 1 Minute After You Die. And Kyle, what was just two or three, as we wrap up this whole series, what were two or three of your takeaways?
Well, I think
in
one
the
of the things
series?
that I liked, each week talking about kind of the different subject and focusing on things, when you start off and you talk about judgment or you talk about destiny or how those things all play out, it kind of brings a somberness or serious tone. And the very first week at our campus, we had a guy that was visiting, and as soon as we start talking about, do you know where you'll end up, after the service, he was just sitting there. And one of our church members went up to him and said, "Man, are you okay?" And he said, "I'm just thinking about that question. I don't know the answer." And so we got to talk to him about Christ and kind of how to answer that question. And he came out in the lobby, wanted to tell everybody all about it, and super cool. So, just this conversations that we've seen be stimulated by the question of, where will you go? And then talking about heaven and then talking about hell.
Right.
Yeah,
We've got a little construction going on here.
Wow, that was loud.
We just will have to power through it. We've got some things happening. We're shooting on the Sunnyvale campus, and we're doing some renovations. So, yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that
Yeah.
really is an amazing thing. And what else? What are some other takeaways that you've had?
I think the videos during the service that we saw the first couple weeks, when you see what people are thinking and
Right.
wrestling with the question of, what do I really believe and do I know the answer? Just reminds you when you're outside the church, what people are talking about. But then also inside the church, you started a lot of conversations, and people are like, yeah, I do know, or I don't know, or I'm not sure I know. So I think for me, I thought the series was going to be kind of difficult to have conversation around, because people a lot of times don't want to talk about those kind of things. But instead, it really spurred a lot of conversation. And so in our CG, we had tremendous conversation the first couple of weeks of just about things and what it did. So I think it's been a great series, talking about these things and kind of starting those conversations for people to think more about it.
Yeah. Well, the first week we talked about judgment, about what happens when you die, and the idea of facing judgment. The second week we talked about hell, and that was a really pleasant conversation.
That was
and
fun.
then the third week we talked about heaven, and I think we don't think about eternity enough as
Right.
believers. And
I
I don't
agree.
remember who said it. Somebody said, if you're too, I think they said, if you're too heavenly minded, you're no earthly good.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of false to that statement. The
Yeah.
reality
Yeah.
is, I don't know many people that are too heavenly minded. But
Right.
the reality is, we need to, as believers, we need to focus on eternity more.
Yeah.
And one of the central truths of this whole series is that what you believe about eternity will determine how you live today.
Right.
And that first week talking about judgment, that what you believe about eternity, when you start to become cognizant, I was having a seizure or something as I said that, but when you start to become cognizant of the reality of the truth that you're going to stand in judgment before Jesus one day.
Right.
That should shape the decisions that you make today.
Right.
And so when you start to become, when heaven and hell become a reality, when you believe that they're an eternal reality, then it ought to shape the way that you live today. And one of the real practical ways that I think it ought to shape the way that you live is in how you share your faith with unbelievers.
Right.
And so that was really this past week, as we closed up this series, that was really the focus of the week, is the idea of, man, if we care about lost people, if we
Right.
care about how our friends and our family members are going to spend their eternity, then we've got to take the opportunity to share with them.
Right.
And
Right.
so, what are some thoughts that you have on that?
Well, and I think when you have the first couple of weeks and you individually are wrestling with or know for sure what your eternal destination is, it brings either a concern that you don't know, or it brings a satisfaction and a security that you do know.
Right.
But then, if you hold it right there, we're really doing an injustice to the people around us to say, hey, if I found the cure for cancer and didn't share it with anybody, I'd be a jerk.
Right.
And so if I have decided where my eternal security is set and then don't do anything about it, this message really spurs us on to think about the people around us.
Yeah, I remember, I've never forgotten when I was in middle school, I think maybe early high school, and I remember hearing this sermon and this illustration of the pastor was reading this story about this guy that was on death row. And on death row, he had this pastor, or maybe it was a priest that came in and kind of talked to him at the end. I think it was a Baptist pastor that went in and talked to him. And he came in and he talked to him about what was going to happen eternally and this reality of hell. And he said to him, the guy that was on death row turned to him and said, listen, if I really believed what you just told me about hell, I would crawl across the United States on broken glass to see one person saved from that.
Oh, wow.
And I've never forgotten that. And I think that's the truth, is that when we're really convinced about how bad hell is,
right,
and about the certainty of hell,
yeah,
or just about how great heaven is.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
really, it shouldn't take the threat of hell. It should take the fact that we wouldn't
right,
want our friends, you really wouldn't want your worst enemies to miss out
right,
on the greatness of
yeah,
eternity in heaven,
right,
either. And so, what are some practical things? Like, let me ask you this, and we didn't talk about these before, so surprise.
Oh, great.
So, what are what have you seen as some reasons why people don't share their faith more?
Well, and I think the number one is always fear. You feel like you're treading in somebody's space that's going to make them, that maybe they believe differently, and there's going to be a conflict, or they're going to think you're pushing something. You just don't know what their response is. But what you find a lot of times when you do share the hope and the good news with somebody, they're super thrilled that you cared enough. Now, you will find the person that's like, no, I don't believe that, and that's okay. But yeah, we tend to stay away from it because we're nervous. We're afraid that people aren't going to accept the message or like the fact that we brought that to them, or that we're going to make them feel bad or whatever. And the other one is, a lot of times people just don't feel equipped. They just don't feel like they have any idea how to do it.
Yeah, right.
And I'm going to mess this up somehow, and I'm going to say the wrong thing, and I could mess this up and say the wrong words and get them saved into another belief or something. And so it, again, goes back to fear that we either don't know, or we don't know how they're going to respond, or those kind of things make us nervous. And there's a lot of other things, but I think our biggest holdback is we don't believe strongly enough that there is a destination that people are going, either with God or away from God, because we just don't look forward to that. One of the things that really stood out in this series to me, thinking back with a conversation I had with some senior adults, and one of them is my wife's grandmother, who loved the Lord, but had a really rough life, really difficult, strained, difficult times. And she always looked forward to heaven. She was looking, she'd always say, I'm ready to go to glory. I'm ready to be off this earth, because it had been so difficult. She's looking for a better place. But I feel like in our culture, we strive so hard not to feel distressed that we don't know what longing for heaven is. We want to long for a better earth, and we don't know how good it really is. And so,
and I've seen that in third world countries.
Oh, yeah.
If you're in third world countries, you discover more of a longing for eternity, because they haven't inoculated themselves with earthly pleasures. They don't have the same kind of
that's true.
Privileges that we have. So as we talked this last week, we talked about 2 ways to share your faith, and the first was what we call bless, and it means, let me just kind of walk you through this acronym. It's the B is begin with prayer, and I think that's so important, because when you start praying for somebody, the main thing is not only are you inviting God to show His power in that thing, but you're also, I've discovered that I become more aware of opportunities to share with people when I'm praying for them.
True.
So you begin with prayer. Number 2 is you listen. You want to hear what they have to say. Number 3 is you eat. And everybody seems to like that one. Pretty much everybody's on board with that one. That it's always great to have a meal, or to share a cup of coffee with somebody, and it just kind of seems to open up some conversation possibilities.
Right.
The first S is you serve.
Yeah.
And I think it helps people when you serve.
Right.
And then the last S is you tell your story.
Yeah.
So can you think of examples when you've seen, maybe you didn't purposely walk through every one of those, but you've seen that format work in people's lives?
Well, and I think one of the things, like when you sit down, like you said, with a cup of coffee or a meal or whatever, and you're really engaged in kind of an intimate conversation where you can talk about life and hear their story, and when you give people a chance to tell their story, and sometimes you hear.
Whoa, did y'all hear that?
Well, I'd like to say that's construction, but it's actually the trash guy taking everything out.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff going on here. But
so this must be the best CG video ever, because
Yes.
the Lord is defending us from all of the attacks, I guess.
But it's the worst, and the Lord's trying to shut us down.
Well, that could be
just
too.
depends on how you look at it. But anyway, go ahead.
Seems to happen when
We'll
I'm in this
roll
video.
with your
Yeah.
we'll roll with your suggestions. So.
Well, one of the things that I think is hugely important is when you listen to someone's story and you hear where their needs are, and then you have that relationship, that relational equity to be able to speak into their lives. And I'm not saying it hasn't happened, because it's been a tradition in especially the Western culture for probably 100 years that we do street evangelism where you have no relational equity and you just start sharing the gospel. And I know people have responded to that, but for the most part, people are like, why are you trying to give me something I don't even know I need? You're trying to give me a chemo treatment, I don't even know I have cancer. And so in that relational format where you're having a conversation, people have already begun to trust what you have to say, and you can speak into them.
As when we started the church, one of the things that was really important to us was this idea of relational evangelism.
Yeah.
And we all came out of settings where there was, there were all kinds of ways that people shared their faith, but one of it was knocking on people's doors and just kind of cold calling.
Yeah.
And hey, first of all, I'm like, I never want to invite somebody into a conversation that I don't know,
Yeah.
and so I don't know why anybody would want to do that. But but this idea of establishing a relationship first, that there's a building of that, there's a listening to them, there's a serving them, there's a you're building some rapport, you're building some equity, and you're earning the right to be heard.
Right.
And I'm certain. I'm certain that there are people that have been saved when they were watching the Super Bowl and they saw the John 3:16 sign. I'm certain.
Of course, yeah, sure.
I'm certain that that's happened. However, I think the primary way that people come to faith in Christ is when they have a relationship with somebody that's a believer, and that person is sharing their story.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about. Now we have a police officer out there. I think somebody's getting arrested. Got a lot of distractions.
It's probably
here,
David.
Fortunate that it's you and I doing this, Kyle, because I don't think anybody else could handle.
Nobody's as professional as we are.
But the reality of sharing your faith around a relationship really changes it.
Right.
When people know that you care about them and that you want the best for them, and that you've invested in their lives.
Right.
So I think that's a powerful way to do that. The other thing that we talked about, and we got to close up here, but just wanted you to comment on is the second way that we talk to people about sharing their faith is the come and see mentality.
Right.
And just to understand that that's a legitimate evangelism strategy.
Right.
That you don't have to have all the answers, or even to feel comfortable verbalizing your whole story, to say, man, I just want you to come with me and hear what God's doing in other people's lives.
Yeah, and I like the illustration that I heard a long time ago was, we really are starving people that found food, and our goal is to take other people that are starving to the food as well. And that kind of works in that example where you realize that, hey, God's changed me, and I don't really know how I can communicate it or tell you all about it. But if you'll come and see what I've seen and taste what I've tasted and experience what I've experienced, it could change you as well. And so I don't have to be prepared to do a lot of things. I don't have all the pressure on me, but it is, hey, I'm going to invite you to something that changed my life, and I think it could probably change yours. And it goes back to that same illustration. If your doctor is 150 pounds overweight and tells you to start losing weight or you're not going to be healthy, you're like, I don't know that I trust that quite so much.
Right.
And so it's, if your life has been changed, then you're the perfect satisfied customer, so to speak, of what the gospel's done for you, that you could bring somebody else to hear that same thing or get the same message.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, our biggest desire in this message is that it doesn't matter how you do it.
Yeah.
And you may have had old time evangelism training, and you and I probably went through a lot of those because you're more old time than I am, but we some old, evangelism explosion or the Roman road or whatever your method is, and whether it's that or bless or come and see.
Yeah.
The important thing is that we care enough about our lost friends,
Yeah,
and we
exactly.
care enough about our lost family members
Right.
that we're going to share our faith with them, because eternity really is at stake, and eternity is a real thing, and,
Right.
and the reality of heaven and hell ought to settle into our lives
Yeah.
that motivate us
Yeah, absolutely.
to live on mission.
Yeah.
And so that's our hope for you. So we want to say thank you for joining us. We're glad that, Kyle, I'm glad that you were a part of this, and so
Yeah.
thanks for helping out with this. And we want you to have some great discussion at home. And so thanks for joining us, and bless you as you discuss this.